I'm still doing money saving tips, and I'm on tip number 21, and that is to have a 70s mindset. And another way of saying that is to lower your standards. I don't know what it was like where you were at in the 70s or the 80s, but I do know where I was at in the 70s and the 80s. People had a lot more stuff in the 80s. Their standards were a lot higher. In the 70s, where I was at, people had one TV, and that was in the living room. But in the 80s, everybody had a TV, a computer, and a gaming system, not only in the living room, but in the den and in everybody's bedroom. I was thinking, really? Does everybody need all this in their bedroom? In the 70s, if someone had five outfits of clothes, that was an excessive abundance. But in the 80s, where I worked, people had so many outfits, you never saw them wearing the same thing twice. And in the 70s, people had what they needed where I was at anyway. Nobody did without anything. So, one thing we can take from this is the fact that it's not how much you make, it's what you do with what you have. And I have a story that I can tell you, a true story. Names have been changed. There are two best friends, Cindy and Rosa. They're the same age. They both get married. And they live in this small town where there's not a lot of high paying jobs. Cindy and her husband decide to go out of town where there are high paying jobs, and both Cindy and her husband get a high paying job. Rosa and her husband choose to stay in this small town. Her husband has a job making minimum wage. Rosa is a stay at home wife. And then they both have a baby boy. And so, like I said, Cindy and her husband are making big bucks. Rosa and her husband don't have a lot. But Cindy and her husband go to the mall all the time and to the flea market. They always go shopping. They're always going to the movies. They're always going to restaurants. They're always going to fast food. Meanwhile, Rosa stays at home and cooks for her husband. The only time they go to the store is if they need something. They go and get it and come on out. They never go to fast food. They never go to restaurants. They never go to the movies. So you would think that Cindy and her husband are happy and their lives are full. And you would think that Rosa and her husband are miserable. But the opposite is true. Cindy's all stressed out because her husband is a spendaholic and he spends every penny they make. But Rosa and her husband save after they pay their bills. And then Rosa has another baby boy. Rosa and her husband and their two baby boys are happy. Rosa's husband treats her with respect. He treats the finances with respect. Cindy is miserable. Her husband does not treat the finances with respect. He's always bringing more stuff inside the house. And Cindy is constantly cleaning the house because there's so much stuff in the house. So she works full time, and if she's not at the mall or the flea market or the movies with her husband, she's at home cleaning the house. She never gets any me time. And then Cindy and Rosa both have a baby girl. So now Cindy and her husband have 2 kids. Rosa and her husband have 3. Cindy and her husband have never taken a vacation because they spend all their money at the flea market and the mall. But they decide to go home and visit Rosa and her husband. So they do. They go visit Rosa and her husband and their 3 kids. And Cindy is jealous because Rosa's house is so clean, neat, and organized. It's not full of stuff and junk. When she went in the kids' bedroom, everything was neat and organized. All their clothes, all their toys. Things wasn't just piled sloppily. All the clothes were neatly put away. Everything was neat. The living room was neat. The whole house was neat. The kitchen, everything. They only had the amount of pots and pans that they needed. When you looked in the cabinet for the pots and pans, they didn't just all fall out like they did at Cindy's house. Everything was so neat. And their lawn was mowed, and Rosa even had a garden. And then they went back home, and Cindy was so depressed because in her house you couldn't even walk. There was so much stuff and junk. Nothing was organized. The clothes were not put away because she didn't have time to put them away. There were so many of them, and plus she spent all her time at the mall or the flea market or just cleaning up the house. So Cindy wishes that they didn't have so much money because then her husband couldn't spend it all on stuff and junk. So, long story short, Cindy gets really depressed. She ends up divorcing her husband and decides to start over. Meanwhile, Rosa and her husband have celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They are doing great. They're happy. And because they did the money so well, they now have a good savings account. They have everything they need. And Rosa did go to work after the kids got in school. But Cindy now, since she had to start over, she started over with nothing. She lost her high-paying job. And Rosa and her husband have so much, starting out with so little. And that's all.